Whether you will go along with any change in taste?
No.
Well, you never know because we have.
Well, we
gone along with
don't we?
Yeah.
In 1964, the Beatles were the most popular band on the planet. Their arrival in the United States opened the doors to their internationalization. Their concerts and chart-topping singles brought beatlemania to its highest point. United Artists had achieved its intentions of bringing the Beatles to the big screen, and this was the perfect excuse for the band to start working on an iconic album that would mark the beginning of their revolution and their new visions of artistic life. Lennon and McCartney's compositions had evolved exponentially. There's been a particular jump forward in ballad writing. The steamroller power of the harmonies, the audacity of chord choices, the gleaming sound of George Harrison's new Rickenbacker alongside the confident northern blasts of harmonica, and a band and producer grown more than comfortable with each other, brought out the dominant sound of the Beatles in their peak as a pop band. And with good humor, energy, and irresistible enthusiasm, the Beatles had the world at their feet.
Take 6!
I heard a funny chord. Is it? Oh, sorry. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4.
After returning to England from their successful stay in the United States, the Beatles were committed to filming a movie. Since it was negotiated at the end of 1963, the group was not too excited about it. The Beatles were not actors, and they set certain conditions for the project. They did not want to make a film in the style of Elvis Presley, which had unrealistic scripts and artistically had many shortcomings. So the Beatles had the privilege of choosing their screenwriter, and the chosen one was Alan Owen, whom the band admired. He spent some time hanging out with the group to get to know their personalities, dynamics, and expressions in order to write the script. To direct, they chose Richard Lester, who already had experience in British cinema. The filming was scheduled to start after they returned from America, and at the same time they would have to find space in their schedule to record the new album.
1, 2, 3, 4. I missed the beat.
Take 8!
Shut up.
Between January and March, the band had time to compose and record between their short breaks. Richard Lester had asked them for 7 songs, and it was the priority to have them for the film. On June 1st, with the film completed and the band returning from holidays, the Beatles returned to EMI, recording the remaining songs for the LP. A couple of covers were also recorded that would end up as B-sides for singles and on the EP Long Tall Sally. Covers of Carl Perkins' Matchbox, with Starr on lead vocals and Larry Williams' Slow Down, appeared on the EP, while Lennon's songs I'll Cry Instead and I'll Be Back appeared on the LP. The following day, the band completed Any Time at All, When I Get Home, and Things We Said Today. And after that, the band spent the remainder of June and July touring internationally.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The side A of the album focuses on the songs featured in the film. A Hard Day's Night opens with the title track of the album and the movie, composed by John in record time. The opening chord was very innovative and absolutely recognizable, studied extensively by musicologists with disparate opinions on what chord it is. What makes it so complex is that, although it sounds like a guitar chord, Dominic Pedler, in the Songwriting Secrets of the Beatles, identified 5 different sound sources, plus an extra sound created by Paul's bass note, reverberating off the soundboard of John's acoustic guitar.
No! I missed the beat.
Also, the solo part is great. George Harrison's 12-string Rickenbacker guitar solo was doubled on piano by Martin, but tracked at half speed and sped up during mixing. The song explodes with vitality, 2 minutes and 33 seconds of pure musical adrenaline.
It's F with a G on the first string.
Thank you very much.
Your little finger.
Thank you very much.
Sounds better on a 12 string.
With the scene of the Beatles playing cards, this song is inevitably related to the film. Lennon's song, whose presence is overwhelming most of the album, was inspired by a line in Till I Kissed You by the Everly Brothers. It was one of the first tracks recorded for the film between February 25th and 26th. The harmonica part, unlike previous Beatles songs, is influenced by Bob Dylan, as his album The Freewheelin' had been bought by George Harrison in Paris. The song became an upbeat classic for the time.
If I give my heart.
Although he had tried his hand at it with earlier songs, Lennon considered this song his first serious effort at composing a ballad. People tend to think of him as a witty, aggressive, abrasive person, but he had a caring side that he didn't like to show because he felt vulnerable, McCartney said of Lennon. Lennon and McCartney's voices were recorded on the same microphone, creating one of the band's most beautiful vocal exercises.
If I fell in love with you.
Lennon on the lows and McCartney on the highs, a vital example of the extensive coordination between the two partners. After 15 takes, they hit upon the definitive one, and the Beatles were proud of what they had achieved. John Lennon gives Harrison a song to sing. George had to limit himself to focus only on his guitar, and his singing for the album may have been influenced by Richard Lester, who wanted to give each Beatle a moment of protagonism in the film. And that is why Harrison ended up singing this song for the movie. As Lennon would cover most of the album's track list, McCartney opted for quality over quantity of songs on the record, and one of his 3 contributions to the album was And I Love Her. When the Beatles began working on it on February 25th, McCartney had a very different arrangement for the song.
I give her all my love.
But on February 27th, and dissatisfied with the previous attempts, George Martin realiantized the tempo. Ringo left the drums on the side, and the song opted the way we all know it. McCartney called And I Love Her the first ballad I impressed myself with. Lennon called it McCartney's first Yesterday. Though the song was written mainly by McCartney, John Lennon claimed in an interview with Playboy that his major contribution was the middle 8 section.
And I was just thinking actually about my song, And I Love Her. I give her all my love. I had that. But then George comes in with do-do-do-do. Now you think about that. That's the song. But he made that up on the session because he knew the chords, and he just said, well, we said it needs a riff. I didn't write that.
With a bold Lennon even playing falsetto, Tell Me Why is a song that still sounds fresh to this day. With odes to the Beach Boys and deep, mature lyrics, it became one of Lennon's favorites, recounting an argument in a marriage in an almost autobiographical way. McCartney wrote Cant Buy Me Love in Paris. The song was written under the pressure of the success achieved by I Want to Hold Your Hand, which had just reached #1 in America. When producer George Martin first heard Can't Buy Me Love, he felt that the song needed changing. I thought that we really needed a tag for the song's ending and a tag for the beginning, a kind of intro. So I took the first 2 lines of the chorus and changed the ending and said, let's just have these lines. It sold more than 2 million copies as a single only in the USA, where it was at the top for a month and a half, achieving with this song the famous record of the band with its 5 songs at the top. When pressed by American journalists in 1966 to reveal the song's true meaning, McCartney stated, I think you can put any interpretation you want on anything, but when someone suggests that Can't Buy Me Love is about a prostitute, I draw the line. He went on to say, the idea behind it was that all these material possessions are all very well, but they won't buy me what I really want.
Anytime at all.
The B-side of the album is usually disqualified as it is considered by many as filler, which is usually a mistake. It is a fact that the maximum energy and talent of the Beatles was put in the songs that conformed the film, but not for this reason the following songs are bad. The Beatles were evolving, and in this song their capacity to go beyond musically is shown. In his 1980 interview with Playboy, Lennon described the song as an effort at writing It Won't Be Long, same ilk, C to A minor, with me shouting.
Don't wanna cry when there's people there.
In addition to the genres they had dominated at the time, here country began to form part of the band's musical imagination, and this song has part of that, with one of the most underrated choruses of the album, in addition to the lyrics possessing the essence of a future Lennon, where guilt and sadness became an important part of their lyrics. Like John Lennon, Paul began to experiment with minor chords and also entered the road of more reflective lyrics, a ballad that Paul was proud of and inspired by Jane Asher. The lyrics addressed the singer's love for a girl despite the distance between them. McCartney later described the song as exhibiting future nostalgia, being nostalgic about the moment we're living in now. Since it was composed, it has been one of its author's favorite songs, and he played it live on several tours until a few years ago. According to Cynthia Powell, Lennon's wife at the time, this is another theme that reflects her husband's state of mind. In those years, it was strange for Lennon to talk about a home when he was always looking for one. However, there were moments in his life that kept him happy as a father and husband, even if it was only for short periods of time. The song also has references to sex that were well hidden by Lennon in a society that did not accept such references in songs. This track was a very high contrast with what the author sings in the previous track. The lyrics had real references to a chapter of Lennon's life in which he felt jealous of his wife while Stuart Sutcliffe was dancing with her, being the result of an embarrassing chapter that was captured on the album a couple of years later.
You know, if you break my heart, I'll go.
The last song of the album, I'll Be Back, became another of John's themes reminiscent of his youth. Lennon created the song based on the chords of Del Shannon's Runaway, which had been a UK hit in April 1961. George Martin preferred to open and close Beatles albums using dominant material stating. Another principle of mine when assembling an album was always to go out on a side strongly, placing the weaker material towards the end, but then going out with a bang. But fading away in tonal ambiguity at the end of A Hard Day's Night, it was a surprisingly downbeat farewell, perhaps as a sign of his coming maturity.
It's been a hard day's night.
Released on July 10th of 1964 and reaching #1 worldwide, A Hard Day's Night unseated the group's previous LP with the Beatles from the top spot. Also, the two singles reached #1, increasing the anticipation and success of each new album of the Beatles, showing that the band's impact was increasing and reaffirming their status as the biggest stars of the time. A Hard Day's Night was received with good reviews and with perfect rating for many media, highlighting how the sound of some songs would mark the way for the Byrds and for some folk singers and bands. The success of this record had also started to open the American market for bands like the Rolling Stones, the Animals, or the Kinks, inspired also young American groups. The press loved the record, and even put it as a generational spokesman. One journalist recalled, "If he had to explain the impact of the Beatles to a stranger, I would play the soundtrack of A Hard Day's Night." The songs, conceived in a hotel room in a couple of spare weeks between their British heyday and the conquest of America, were full of inspiration and speed. And the record was full of adventure, knowledge, love, and abundant charm.
She gives me everything.
Robert Freeman, who was the group's photographer, was in charge of the cover of the album. His photographs had already been on the album with the Beatles, and he would continue to work with the band on the album covers for Beatles for Sale, Help, and Rubber Soul, being the band's head photographer between 1963 and 1966. The album had different covers in the US and England, but in both were Freeman's photos. A Hard Day's Night in England was a complete album, and in the US a soundtrack. Also, this cover is the most parodied and replicated of the Beatles of the first half of his career. According to Lennon in a 1980 interview with Playboy magazine, "I was going home in the car and Dick Lester suggested the title Hard Day's Night from something Ringo had said. So Dick Lester said, 'We are going to use that title.'" The release of the album and film was also accompanied by John Lennon's debut as a writer. In His Own Right was released in March. The book consisted of short stories, poems, and line drawings, often surreal in nature. The book was the first solo project by one of the members of the Beatles in any creative medium. Many credit the film's script as the reason for creating the imaginary perception of each Beatle. The roles that each played in the film stuck with them for life as stereotypes in some ways. About to go on tour to promote their album, the Beatles had a setback that marked part of their history. Ringo Starr became ill with tonsillitis and was hospitalized on June 3, 1964. Postponing the tour represented a risk to all the group's subsequent commitments, so they decided to have a replacement while Ringo recovered. John and Paul accepted the proposal, but George Harrison was more reluctant, and they had to convince him with some difficulties. Jimmy Nicol, recommended by George Martin, was chosen 27 hours before playing their first concert, and for 13 days Jimmy Nicol was one of the Beatles. The Beatles in this album were very attentive to the mono mixing process, which they took care of in every detail during its recording and mastering. But when it came to the stereo mix, they showed complete disinterest, leaving George Martin to do all the work, a phenomenon that was to be repeated constantly in the following albums. You Know What to Do was a song that was an unknown during those years. It was known that it was the second song that Harrison composed and that it was expected for the album. But in the end, it was not finished for different reasons, and fortunately in the 90s it could be known globally thanks to the Anthology Project.
Just call on me when you're lonely.
A Hard Day's Night solidified all the success that the Beatles had achieved in the last months. A key period where youth, their hunger for triumph, and the sweetness of success were enjoyed by its members to the fullest, giving as a result a fresh and pure album that marked an entire generation. All the implications of fame were not yet so heavy, and gave to the Beatles one of their most dreamed of and unattainable periods. And that's all for today. Comment below what other albums you would like to see in this series. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our videos, and thank you for your time. This is Music Box.